Hi, welcome to Tales from the Sky Lounge. It's a podcast about business, consulting, and venture investing. We get out there in the world and we talk to people who are making it happen and we get their stories. If you can like and subscribe, our producer James gets really happy about that. So today's guest in the Sky Lounge, Steve Subar. Hi, Steve.
Hello, Todd. How are you?
Hey, doing well. So, Steve, who are you and what are you working on?
At present, this doesn't make great cocktail conversation. I'm the inventor and patent holder of the world's first fully automated yoga mat cleaning machine.
That's awesome. And you're
True
an
story.
entrepreneur and you can't get away from it, right? It's truly a disease where you kind of have to go back to the well and start companies. But like, tell us about MatFresher or MatFresher.
MatFresher.
Okay.
But good point. That is what it does. So I've been building and exited companies almost my entire career, 30 plus years. And no doubt, yes, there's sort of an addiction to the thrill of that experience. And when I said to myself more recently, if I start another company, what's it going to be? I didn't take the usual approach of thinking about a problem and a solution. I started with, what if I could create a business model for whatever that business would be? What would be the business model I'd want to build? So I thought about building a business model first and a company second. When I thought about building the business model, I was thinking through, what are the key elements based on my experience, things that have gone well, things haven't gone well. What are the elements that I'd want to preserve in a new company? And there were really three elements, almost really three constraints around ideas. One is that it needed to have recurring revenue, much akin to what all of us in the enterprise SaaS industry are familiar with. Two, it had to have high gross margins, also an attribute that's attractive for valuation. One reason software is so highly valued. And third, and this was going to be the element most different than anything I've done, it had to have essentially zero B2B sales friction. My entire career has been B2B sales friction. Everything I've done has been large systems, complex systems, expensive systems, long sales cycles. And so I thought, at this stage of my life, at this stage of my career, I'm kind of done with that. So those were the constraints: recurring revenue, high gross margin, and no B2B sales friction. So with that in mind, the question was, well, what would that be?
Okay. And then what is it?
Well, this is also my 20th anniversary of having done hot yoga. And I never really understood why this practice that's built on the Indian word is niyama of saucha, which has to do with cleanliness of the spirit, cleanliness of the mind, cleanliness of the body. We're done on these dirty, disgusting things that smell like the inside of an old hockey equipment bag, yoga mats.
Okay.
And so I began thinking about, all right, well, is that a problem that anybody cares about? And if they care about it, would they spend any money? And that was the genesis.
Okay. So I want to hear about the thing, but I want to get in the mind of the entrepreneur. So many people like have an idea and they just go build the product and then they start talking to people. You did what experienced entrepreneurs do and go, man, I don't want to have any trouble selling this thing. I want to know if people need, desire this thing, and we'll exchange money for it, I guess. So what does that process look like for you? Like, you got this idea, it's probably wasn't the first idea, probably, right? Just, this one was different because why? Like, what did you do to go figure out if this is something that's going to catch fire, not going to have a huge sales burden?
The last company I founded and was acquired in 2012 by General Dynamics. And for the last essentially 13 years, I've been operating as a management consultant, almost like an operating partner for tech companies. And one of the common mistakes that is made when thinking of a new idea is to validate product market fit by building the thing and then seeing if somebody wants to buy it. And the problem with that is that it can be very expensive and almost always takes twice as long and costs 3 times as much as you may have planned. And it turns out that you can actually get a lot of market sounding, a lot of feedback, a lot of knowledge, a lot of validation, early validation of product market fit without investing very much in the product at all. So yeah, that was the approach that I took, and here's what it looked like. So the question was, would people spend money to get their yoga mat cleaned? And the strategy for doing that was really simple. I got a folding table, some rubber gloves, s- some
Okay.
antiseptic spray from Whole Foods. I got a square reader for my iPhone. I got a T-shirt with a company logo, and I asked yoga studios if I could hang out and see if people wanted to spend $2 to get their mat cleaned, and that's what I did. People would come in, I'd greet them. People would leave, I'd greet them, and I was able to determine, yeah, guess what? People will spend money to do that, but something important happened along the way that wasn't planned, that was actually more valuable and has a lot to do with product market fit. So in between the 10 minutes before class and 10 minutes after yoga class, the 50 minutes in between, I'm essentially don't have anything to do, but I can talk up the front desk staff, the owner, the operator, the instructors. And what I really learned was what it means to own and operate a gym, a health club, a yoga studio, a Pilates studio. And it turns out that a bigger problem than hygiene are unit economics. And that gets to how to make money. So that began to evolve my thinking about, would there be this intersection between providing economic benefit on the one hand and improving brand identity by improving hygiene on the other. So that was all done before having built a product.
So, a lot of fancy words. So break it down. So make friends with the gym people, and they can help you sell it, right? If they get a little piece of the action, I guess is where you're going with this. Or what's the thought?
Well, if I just take yoga as an example, yoga and Pilates are about 43,000 studios in the US. And according to the industry association that tracks this information, something like only 10% of operators make or net more than $100,000 a year. So it's
Jeez.
not something you do because you want to get rich. It's something you do because you want to help people. So if you can figure out how to offer a solution or a system that helps with the bottom line, there's an obvious benefit. And that's not something I would have understood prior to doing some of this product market fit without the product. One of the things I learned was that it's expensive for studios to keep their place clean. But it turns out that hygiene, especially in a hot yoga or hot Pilates environment, hygiene is the number one factor that improves NPS and also results in churn. So cleanliness is a big deal. So if you can do something to make visible that you're invested in hygiene and cleanliness, which reinforces that element of your brand, and at the same time, reduce the amount of time that your staff need to spend cleaning yoga mats, then you're actually enabling them to get a kind of a return on investment by reducing their labor costs or being able to redirect those people to do other more important things.
Got it. Got it. And everybody wants to go to a clean gym. They want the neat freak, cleaning the gym. Yeah. Nobody wants to go to a dirty gym and roll around on the floor for sure.
Well, I think the bigger point was that I learned some things about the value, about what to imbue in the value in the. I learned some things around what to imbue in brand values that I would have had no idea about hadn't I spent that time talking to the people who own and operate the businesses.
And then it seems like there's different voices, right? When you're talking about your ICP or, who buys the gym buys it or and lets you put it in. And there's the user, the end user, which is a different audience, right? And they both kind of have different motivations for getting involved with this product, right?
100%. Our business model is super simple. Basically, the gym or the studio just rents it and they make it available as an amenity to their members and their clients. Super simple.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. And then it's just, you just tap your phone or you have an account or how do you pay for it or how does that work?
Well, it's free. It's a free amenity.
Okay.
So the operator, the studio, the gym just rents the MatFresher.
Oh, wow.
They use it to clean their rental mats, which saves them an amazing amount of time and convenience. And then they make it available for free to their users. In fact, let me show you this video.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd love to see what it looks like.
Perfect.
Oh my god, it's so
All right.
Oh my god, it smells so good. Yay!
Oh my god, amazing.
I put it in broken.
That's okay.
Oh, it smells so good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Princess. Yes. This is like the best thing any establishment has ever had. Ever. This is so cool, and it pulls it for you. Like, what more could you ask for?
All right.
Wait, that's so cool.
Yay! And then it's all set. Yeah. And it's rolled up. Oh my gosh. This is amazing. Look how clean. Yay. Who cleans her mat? This is all by itself. Oh. Yay. I think that this is the greatest invention. Everybody loves it. It's the highlight of our class. We even have a line when class is over fighting for who uses the MatFresher first.
So it looks like in that video, everybody was pretty happy and it was pretty easy to use, and you just kind of pop it in there and does its thing for a second, and then you got a clean mat and off you go. Like, what's not to like?
One would think, yeah, the response has been amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, people love it.
So, how did you? So you went through. I'm intrigued by this thought process. You know, the mind of the master here. So you want to go validate product market fit, and then you used a proxy product or service, right? Build a service, you know, hand cleaning the mats, I guess, in lieu of a formal product, which would have been a machine at the end. And then and do what you got to do to figure out whether people care. And how inventive is that? That's a big deal, right? Is figuring out product market fit as cheaply as humanly possible, as fast as you can.
Well, right. You know, and a lot of businesses talk about, particular software businesses talk about building their MVP. But somehow it seems like the idea, you know, the first letter in the word minimal gets taken out.
Right.
And it ends up being a massive investment. And I think as well, you know, sometimes there can be misdirection by taking feedback from the customer verbatim in terms of what they want, and then putting that, you know, feeling a pressure or a need to integrate that into the so-called MVP to eventually step your way towards product market fit. But, you know, it turns out that if you're innovating, it's very hard for the customer to actually accurately describe to you what it is they want. Sometimes what'll happen is they'll tell you what they want your product to do or not to do. But you always need to ask, what's the question behind the question? In other words, do you want the customer prescribing how to accomplish something, or do you want to understand fundamentally what they're trying to accomplish? And then, as the expert in the technology or the technique or the business model, help them understand a better way to get to where they're going. So MVPs tend not to be minimal, and they tend to sort of evolve with this idea that if you only did what the customer said, they'd be lining up to spend money, and that usually turns out not to be true.
So a couple things to react to that. I think you're right. You know, so I get this new favorite product market fit metric. So if you've got it in the market, whatever it is, and 40% of your customer base gets violently mad if you threaten to take it away, you know, you've got it, right? And then, so as opposed, you know, painkillers, not vitamins. So if you got a nice little vitamin product, you know, people will say nice things to you, and it's almost the cruelest, you know, type of validation you can get. It's like, yeah, it's a good product. And then they never open their wallet, right? They get dinosaur arms when it's time to pay. And then, like, take it or leave it, you know, and that's not, you're not going to scale that kind of business, right? And then, so it's hard to differentiate between, yeah, kind of, and versus, hell yeah, please don't take that away from me.
100%. And you know, the other side of that is that oftentimes the focus is on solving a problem. It seems like, you know, all the best advice on how to put to pitch deck starts with describe the problem. Well, why does a great new business need to be about solving a problem? It doesn't. The flip side of that coin is a great opportunity. And so trying to solve a problem isn't necessarily the rubric for how to build a successful company. It could be how to capture a new opportunity, or it could be a combination of both. But I'd like to say this: the thing itself is one element of it, the technology or the product or the service. And innovation is usually used interchangeably when describing what's going to be a great idea. But what sometimes gets missed as well is the idea of innovating not the technology, but also innovating the business model.
Yes.
And if you think about some of the most successful companies, their innovation was both. It was both product and business model. And so my view is that if you can think of a business where the business model innovation is as impactful as the technology itself, then you have the potential for something very special, because it creates a kind of a flywheel in the business.
So I've got this idea around my head. I've been going real hard on practical AI this year. But I'm rapidly, a software background. So rapidly coming to the conclusion that we're headed toward fast food software. Like it's no longer a big deal to get software. And then there's going to be a bazillion, any idea you have, it can be, put out there in the market in a week, maybe less. And then so it's no longer the differentiating layer. It's not costly. It's not hard. And then so what are you left with, right? And it's so we used to, Silicon Valley play was, hey, go put $5 million into some really smart young folks, and then they're going to grind like hell and they get some kind of piece of software or piece of hardware or something. It's not the game anymore, right? It's kind of what you're talking about as an experienced founder of product market fit, opportunity, business model, pricing, acquisition, channel, I don't want to do B2B SaaS ever again. It's too complicated, it's hard. Right. And then, so you only get that through blood, sweat and tears and experience. So maybe kind of reflect on that. Like there's a big chunk that's happening right now, real time, really fast, where the founders that are going to make it are the ones that are thinking like you do, where it's business model first. How am I going to distribute this? How do I know really, really fast and really, really cheaply, almost before I have a product, whether people care, right? And they're going to separate from money.
Yeah, there are a couple elements that. The first is, I agree with you 100%, Todd. In this race, the swift will beat the slow more than the large will beat the small. There's no doubt about that. So, so there's that. I guess, the other third leg of the stool might be defensibility. So if we're talking about a great idea to solve a problem or create an opportunity, if we're talking about innovating a business model as much as you're innovating technology, and then you've got some real defensible mechanism, maybe those are the, three key ingredients. But I think there's a fourth as well. And this really comes from my consulting background, but it's really interesting to see how generationally decisions are made and mistakes are made. And I'd say, there was a time when people worked in the office, and one of the advantages of that was being able to learn from one another. When that sort of broke down, when that construct broke down, and of course now, we've got work from home is probably the more popular mode. There became an issue in terms of learning. And one of the things I've noticed amongst founders is in describing their journey, when things didn't go according to plan, oftentimes whatever that little story is about something gone wrong, it's very quickly followed at the end of the paragraph with a few common words, which is comma, but this is what we learned. And
Okay.
the idea of making a lot of mistakes quickly, but this is what we learned. As if making the mistakes was a good enough result that having made the mistake in the first instance was, let's just say, excused because you learned something valuable. And obviously, learning is critical, but I always say information is not the same as wisdom,
Mm-hmm.
and learning from making mistakes is not the same as good decision making.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
And I think what's happened along the way is that now, and this is really just sort of force multiplied by Perplexity or, any of the different systems that can provide instant access to the world's knowledge. The idea is that when trying to make a decision about something with which you're not familiar, just go online. You used to Google for it. Now you'll look it up in your favorite LLM. And certainly, treasure troves of information. But if we talked before about, the race will be won by the swift. If the measure of that is time, and and time is shortest when making the fewest amount of mistakes, then the question is how to optimize for that. And when it comes to good decision making, information is one, but only one of two important ingredients. What's the second most important ingredient? Experience. If you take information and you add experience, then the plus equals wisdom. And wisdom is the secret to making good decisions. So it turns out that you don't get that from anything you can look up online. You can look up information, but you can't Google experience. You can't Google for experience. And so I think collaboration with those who have gone before, combined with the spirit of entrepreneurship for somebody who hasn't done it before, is really like the superpower that adds to those other three elements I was mentioning. And when you can do all four of those things, then you've got something really special.
So you need experience, and wisdom really is the word. And then, we always used to say, fail fast, fail forward, right? Just make a lot of mistakes, move fast and break things. That's the old kind of, and now it's like, there's no mulligans anymore. Like, you do not get mulligans in this market. And then you can't afford to go figure it out and bump into stuff and blow through cash, because nobody's going to put up with that, because we're all used to this very, very rapid, right down the middle of fairway execution. So where are you going to get violent execution, not hit any of the potholes, because you got to know where they are. You got to have somebody on your team, or be the person on the team that's been there, done that a bunch of times, and then just, know what you're doing in this new company or this new venture.
And there's so many ways that you can get that, right? It can be, no new ideas here. It can be advisors. It can be part of the leadership team. But yeah, this idea of we're just going to go experiment together, that doesn't work by itself so well anymore. And what I'd add to that is that if you think about all the decisions that leaders need to make, entrepreneurs need to make, founders need to make over the course of their company, but let's focus on the earlier stages, the seed stages, the early growth stages. If you looked across many, many companies, you'd probably find that a very large percentage of those decisions don't require new information. They don't. It might be new for a first-time founder, but it's not necessarily new. It's not like somebody hasn't made this decision hundreds of thousands of or a million times before. And so, for the vast majority of those, the 90+% decisions where you don't need to invent anything new, new concept, a new idea, what have you. It's best not to make those mistakes, and then take all of the creative energy around invention and put that into the 5 or 10% of what your company is going to do that nobody's ever done before. That usually goes much better.
So there's a sea change in the world of investing, right? So, we talk about like venture capital seems to be stuck or sick, or like something's going on where, I don't know why, but we're not getting as many unicorns. We're not getting as many exits as we did. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's we don't need a whole bunch of capital to get started, or there's fewer funds, and therefore less money, so it's harder. Do you think people are going to start different kinds of companies than they did maybe 10 or 20 years ago? It used to be you go get a big check, get in business, buy a bunch of computers, and get to work grinding away, and then pour money on and go fast. Are we in a different era now where, product is so quick? It's not the problem anymore. It's be real careful, be real methodical about getting into the market, and then go like hell once you pull the trigger, and in a very capital efficient way.
Well, uh, it's hard to talk about venture capital as uh, it's hard to talk about venture capital without, I think, uh, dissecting some of the different elements.
Yeah, there's a lot there, right? There's a
Yeah.
lot of different gears in that whole
So,
ecosystem.
so, so I think it's still true that a very small number of VCs represent a highly disproportionate percentage of the returns.
Sure, no doubt.
So if you're looking at the top 10 or 15 or 20 firms, uh, if that's trying to be characterized, I think uh, one of the things that can't be ignored is their ability to make a market. Um, right? They have such vast resources, experience, connections. They can see around corners in a way that others can't. And in part, that's because their investment strategy enables a market to evolve in a particular way, right? So winners sometimes get picked really, really early. And although the tombstone might say XYZ invested in ABC company, it's obviously much more thought through, complicated, strategic, that has to do with how an entire ecosystem is going to evolve. Having a crystal ball about that, and then investing, in the things that make that happen, and indeed throwing billions of dollars at those businesses uh, tends to name some, they can king companies essentially. So, so if you want to be one of those, I don't think, you know, if it's something remarkable, I don't think it's hard to raise money. It doesn't seem like it. There's plenty of that money being put to work en masse. And then if you go down to, sort of the next, let's just say everybody else, the tier two through N funds, of which there are thousands. Um, I don't know that they're, um, I mean, certainly deploying less, they're not deploying capital at the same rate, but I think they are like exceedingly clear about what the profile is of the deal they're looking for. And their biggest challenge isn't being capital constrained. Their biggest challenge is finding the deal. I mean, I think there's no more valuable uh, contribution one can make to a VC than helping them source great deals. Um, and so, whereas entrepreneurs might focus on the dearth of capital available today compared to a few years ago, I think investors would look at that from a different perspective and saying it's just harder to find a good deal than it ever was because there's so much more that we need to sift through.
Yeah, a lot of
Um,
noise for sure.
yeah.
Yeah, I just reflecting on our angel group. Some of the deals we see go by, it's like, man, I don't know about this one. you know,
Hey, you want to? I'll just tell you personally. How do you think it is raising money for an automated yoga mat cleaning machine? It's not easy.
yeah,
It's not easy, and I'll tell you why it's not easy. First of all, most of the available investors, they do software. And if they're doing software, they're probably doing AI. MatFresher has got a lot of embedded software built into it to make it work. And it operates over a private NB-IoT network connecting to a rather sophisticated cloud-based application that receives all the telemetry data and other important information. But it's a piece of hardware. So people look at that and go, I don't do hardware. And I'll say, well, wait a minute. Like, let's just say it wasn't a yoga mat cleaning machine. Let's just say it was a machine that printed money. Would you be interested? No, we don't do hardware. So, so that's a challenge. And hardware is there's not a huge intersection of institutional investors and hardware as a services business. We don't sell hardware. We happen to make a piece of hardware. We're delivering what we're selling as a service, as software as a service, hardware as a service. Hardware as a service is not an investment thesis for 98% of institutional venture capital investors in the U.S. So you've got to be creative and look to other sources, and could be family offices. It could also be strategic partners. The fitness tech industry is undergoing a lot of change. Having a one and done is, selling a machine is not really a great business model. They're all looking for recurring revenue. So
sure, right.
you start to have to get creative about um, who would want to write a check because it's going to be strategic to their business. And, that's just a different way of dealing with the scarcity of potential institutional investors.
You said something that was interesting. You said the number one thing you can do to help impact a VC fund is to help them source great deals. So how do you think about where do those deals come from? Do you see the traditional incubator, accelerator type model? Do you think venture studio is a thing that we need to be looking at? That's kind of an old thing that's new again. Is it, just like having a bunch of people out there in the world that, know that you're a good person and bring you deals and it's relationship based? Or how do VCs get those great deals? Or maybe it's all the above. I don't know.
Well, if you're a top tier firm, then you're getting a look at the best deals and you're competing with other top tier funds. But I don't think they have a problem in terms of deal flow. If you're everybody else, you hire a bevy of young, really bright MBA graduates who want to get into venture, and they're smiling and dialing, pounding the phone and doing web searches all day long, looking for those conferences, all the, the various ways they network to try to come up with them. Yep.
A lot of outbound. I think that's one of the things that's interesting is I think 95% of the sourcing is outbound out of the venture fund, them tapping you on the shoulder saying, "Hey, can I take a look at your company?"
Yep. Yep.
Interesting. Well, let me ask you about your kind of origin story. Open Kernel Labs. Like, boy, what a great run that was. So, tell us about how did that one get started? That was definitely a different era. Things were different, and then you grew that company into some amazing stuff. So, how did that get started?
So, I was working on a turnaround of an Asia Pac subsidiary for a U.S. listed software company, and I was living in Sydney, Australia at the time. Went there on essentially a 1-year project to do a turnaround, and fell in love with Sydney and was trying to figure out how to stay longer. Needed to have a visa to do so, and there was an opportunity that came up to be the first executive in residence at a research and development lab that had gotten started by the federal government a few years prior to my arrival, called National ICT Australia. Government wrote a check for $500 million, brought under the 5 different labs, 800 researchers, 175 of whom were PhDs, all working on software projects, small teams. And my brief from the board of directors was to put together a model for spinning out companies. At the time, Australia was trying to address a problem where they were a net importer of IT, so a balance of trade deficit in IT spending. And they figured the only way to do that was to start spawning companies and licensing technology, acknowledging that Silicon Valley took 40 years to get that going, but they had to start somewhere. So I had this amazing opportunity to stay in Australia, put together this model for spinning out companies, essentially stage gating different steps in the process, where then the lab would continue investing or moving into a pure research kind of in organization. So I did that for a year, and wanted to stay a third year, and again needed something to do. So I hired an immigration lawyer and asked if he could figure out how to get me permanent residency. And throughout the Commonwealth, the way that happens is with a point system. Sometimes what's recommended for solving some of our immigration challenges, a point system. The highest categories, there were different categories to get points. And the number one category, the one that was heavily weighted, was age. And I aged out. I was too old. I was going to get like 0 points for age. Because when it comes to that, they want to know somebody's going to be productive for a certain amount of time, not just be a drain on the government. So he said, look, you're going to miss the largest category of points on age, but we'll see how well you can do on the others. And I said, well, what's the next highest weighted category? And he said, profession. And I thought, okay, well, this is fine. I'll probably like bonus points, like CEO, software company startup, creating national benefit, hiring people in Australia. This will be great. So anyway, he goes through the process and calls me one day, obviously very disappointed, and he wanted to let me know that I didn't make it.
No.
I wasn't going to get it. And I said, well, what happened? I knew I scored 0 on the highest weighted category, age, but I thought I'd do really well on occupation, um, right? Because they're trying to create jobs in the tech industry, and that's exactly what I'm doing. And he said, well, every year the weighting changes based on some census data and some government data around what kinds of people we need in the country, like what kinds of workers. And I said, okay, so I guess like software company CEO, that doesn't need a lot of those. I didn't score well. Like, what was the highest category? And I actually told this story to somebody at an Australian consulate office holiday party a couple of years ago. This is like this in between the time was about 15 years. And I was telling her the story, and she said, oh, yeah, I know what it was. And I said, there's no way you could have known what it was. She goes, no, I know what it was that year. And I said, what? And she said, hairstylist. And I
Gosh.
said, you're
Like,
right.
what?
It was hairstylist.
Okay.
It was
All right.
hairstyle. They wanted a lot of hairstylists.
I don't know.
So I struck out on age and I struck out on hairstylist.
So you went to beauty school, and then what? No.
Well, it turned
Yeah.
out that if you could write a long enough essay, that was you had a second bite at the apple. So I stayed a third year, and that resulted in me spinning out a team of researchers from the lab to create Open Kernel Labs.
Okay.
They were working on ways of solving problems of embedded systems, which was not a new concept. So there were, ESX server wasn't new, Zen wasn't new, but those were all ran on server and up to mainframe size devices. Nobody had figured out how to make it work on a power constrained device like an ARM9 processor. And the reason you'd want virtualization on a power constrained device is because that's what was embedded in an embedded system. And you could see the evolution of things like mobile phones. At the time, there was no smartphone, but Linux was first coming out on phones. You could begin to see the evolution of devices as endpoints on networks that would have all this same kind of security flaws and holes, or maybe even worse than what we were used to in a walled environment, behind a firewall in a data center. So we figured out how to apply embedded software on how to apply virtualization software on embedded devices that had certain very specific security properties that would secure those embedded devices. And we focused first on mobile. And over 7 years became the most widely deployed cybersecurity software on mobile devices. By 2012, when we were acquired, we're in about 1.6 billion phones.
That's a lot of them. Yeah. And then General Dynamics, right? That was the exit.
Yeah, so that was kind of interesting. It wouldn't seem like the usual acquirer for a company like ours. So how we got massive deployment was originally our biggest customer was Qualcomm, and they were shipping almost all their wireless chipsets with our software. And then we would have a second version of the software that could be upgraded from what came from the chipset OEM. So this would be available to handset OEMs and wireless operators. And they could do more with our software and pay an additional fee to turn that functionality on, in essence. So we in thinking about our go-to-market strategy, and raising the alarm about flaws in operating systems and architectures on mobile phones that could be serious cyber risks, we thought about, well, who's the most paranoid? Start with them. And it wasn't the consumer. It was the federal government. It was the federal government.
Yeah.
It was actually, in our case, it was the NSA.
Yeah.
At the time, the thousands and thousands of civil servants and non-government workers who flow in and out of Fort Meade every day can't bring a cell phone. Got to leave it in the car. So, like, how ineffective would we be as business people if we couldn't use a cell phone, right? It really slows the pace of communication. But that's how it worked. There was one phone you could use at the time. It was affectionately known as the ObamaBerry, and it was essentially two BlackBerry phones glued together, one for unclassified and one for classified communications. And it was sold by General Dynamics, and I don't know, at the time, I think it cost like 10 grand or something. But it wasn't a very good device if you were an operator because it didn't actually look like a regular mobile phone.
That guy is
but
weird.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's go talk
What
to
is
him.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we became sort of most notably the first method for the NSA to enable standard smartphones to work for their employees. And the way it would work is they could buy, like, say, a Samsung phone. So where the software is designed in South Korea and the phone's made in China, ship it to the US to a SCIF, secure facility, wipe it clean, load our software as the first layer of software, then the operating system with the drivers on top and all the other applications. And so then you could have essentially a standard off-the-shelf smartphone that could be used for top secret communications on the one hand and play Angry Birds on the other. And
Yeah. Yeah.
and so this
It's a big deal, right?
this architecture sort of became widely known as having, stamped for approval by the NSA. The value of our deal with the NSA wasn't in the dollars as much as it was in the reputation.
Sure.
And so this gained notoriety. We then came up with other use cases that didn't have so much to do with security, but had to do with other properties like how to reduce the BOM cost of a device and these other use cases, and then took that to the commercial market. So it was a little bit of the, sort of in through the outdoor approach, which is maybe one of my favorite ways of thinking about. We were talking earlier, Todd, about not innovating just technology, but innovating business models. Oftentimes it starts with, Alice in Wonderland thinking about, I'm going to go in through the outdoor. It's the person when they're going into a crowded place and there's a line of people waiting in an orderly way to get in the door. And it's the person who looks peripherally left and right and sees another door that might be open, but nobody's using. Totally legit entrance, walks up, opens the door and goes right in. Right. So, it's that kind of in through the outdoor thinking that I think is fundamental in being successful.
Well, and it's distribution too, right? Because you have the reputation, you're in the rooms where people were talking about this problem. And then, how else are you going to figure this stuff out? And then, there's another door. It's just around the corner. Nobody's thought to go down that alley to look around the corner, so to speak, to the other door. But yeah, because you were in the business and then you got a reputation and then you had a lot of conversations, you could then, probably stuff starts coming to you. A de novo startup's not going to have those same conversations or that same opportunity or the same insight. And then for you though, as the wise, executioner, you're CEO, you're like, oh yeah, that's an opportunity right there, and then just jump on it and go, right?
Well, almost. A lot of the good ideas came from many other people, not me personally, but to the extent my role was to bring the right group of people together, create the environment for this to happen, and be a part of building those relationships that open doors, frees up everybody else to actually come up with the good ideas. They did that.
Yeah. So I've got this kind of pet theory of accidental empires where, there's three unique gears that companies go through in their evolution. And I'd love to kind of bounce this off you to see if you experience this, but it's like it's like Army, right? Commandos, an army of invasion, and then an army of occupation, right? And this would like selling to the federal government, DOD is like that's definitely the last stage of don't screw it up, don't innovate, like just don't, like we don't want to screw it up. And then like culturally, the way you execute changes, right? So Commandos, it's like that's your lab guys, and then they have one little goal. They don't ask too many questions. It's messy, get it done, get out the door, ship it. And then at some point you start getting market traction, and then you kind of have to attract different personalities in some ways, right? It's not the Commandos who are going to go execute a a new market analysis and rollout, for this thing to go into a new division. But it's a new set of people you have to bring in, and then it's coordination and logistics and legal and marketing and sales, and then at some point you win, right? And then those people, you don't want to get too creative, right? So now it's a different set of people just to kind of make sure that your SLAs are, honored, and make sure it's uptime, and it's just reliable, and we don't want to like shake up the product roadmap. Did you experience like that kind of evolution of culture, or what was the culture like, at the end, or when you sold to General Dynamics? And then, did a lot of those people kind of make it, or did you experience like a lot of like, okay, we're done, that was awesome, off to the next thing?
I would probably be typified more as the commando. If you like your tip, you can be this one or that one. And I don't think I could operate any other way. I sort of failed at being an employee, which is how I became a founder. I figured if I can't, if
Yeah.
nobody can stand me to work for them, I'm going to have to figure it out. So I better develop some leadership skills and try to be a founder and a CEO. And that's worked out okay. But and I think similar for people who are wired uh, in the context of more orderly operations, if that's one way to paraphrase what you were saying. I don't see them turning into commandos. But I think a company needs both. But there's something that gets lost along the way in this concept, because when you were giving me the sort of military analog, I just was thinking of movies. I was thinking of like action movies,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Yeah, action movies like they're all commandos. Like no, otherwise there's no plot line, right? There's no movie. There's no there's no epic adventure.
No
Um,
tension, right?
and and
Yeah.
and it seems like in the description of that transition, it would almost be like the company loses that element, and I don't think that's the case. I think in order to thrive really at any size, there's an element of commando that needs to be imbued with how you operate as a more mature, organized, scalable business. And you mentioned a word in passing that I think is really the key to that. You said winning. And so I think regardless of, let's say, the persona of the individuals or the culture of the company, that aspect of winning, which obviously was there from the start to enable the company to get to where it is, that has to be as live and rich uh, as part of the culture, regardless of what stage of maturity it's at. And it's interesting because when you meet a big company that has been able to not just preserve that, but build on it. It's so obvious, but you don't find it too often.
Well, and I think people naturally progress through these companies age, right? And then if you don't renew, then you inevitably are gonna just kind of win and settle, right? And we've all seen these companies that are 20, 30, 40 years old that kind of had a good run, and things change, and they can't or don't want to, or do new things, and then they kind of die or get acquired, and that's it. Like Sears, great company, had a good run, just couldn't adapt, and maybe there's external factors there, but just kind of didn't adapt with they owned mail order. How come they weren't the new Amazon, right? How come they didn't innovate that new distribution channel when they kind of owned it?
Right.
I don't know, and it's interesting.
Well, I can tell you about General Dynamics. When you meet somebody maybe in the airport or at a restaurant or just wherever, and somehow you learn that they were part of our military, and you say thank you for your service. So General Dynamics is like a whole company of that. It's like I don't know how many people now. Like at the time, maybe 85,000, and they're that's that company. I mean, you can't but not have a deep, heartfelt respect and appreciation for the business of what they do. Uh, Surely some people would differ, but that was my perspective. But the thing about a company that's a defense contractor is the leadership is oftentimes kind of a retirement path for former military leaders. Um, And so the culture of the company is a little bit like that. And, as a guy who failed as an employee, I can tell you I suck at taking orders. I suck at taking orders. I'm I just like court martial myself. So that was a very different culture. But my plan was to make sure that everyone had a soft landing and it was a good result and they could make decisions in terms of, what they wanted to do going forward after that.
Yeah. Um, let me ask you about exits. That's obviously a good one, get acquired. And that was like an overnight success, just took a decade and a half, right? So,
Right.
Mobius was one of the ones that you took public, right? Listed on the NASDAQ.
So
No, yes.
yes, go ahead. Sorry,
Yeah.
finish
And
your
then
question.
so, in the roaring 2000s, that everybody was going to start a company, take venture, scale it like crazy, go list it public. New York Stock Exchange is great. NASDAQ's even better. If you're a tech company, right? So it doesn't seem like we've kind of got out of that habit. Where are we with exits? And then, do you think IPO is going to come back anytime soon? Like I was talking to Neil Miller, he just retired, but he said, like there was one company that he took public that had like $3 million in revenue. It's like, that would be nuts, like today, right? Unheard of. Is this a natural evolution? Are we going to have IPOs? Is there a different mechanism we should be looking at? Like SPACs was kind of cool for a minute and now or reverse mergers or, are the big companies buying like they used to? Or, it's kind of a very confusing time in the market right now. Or like, where do you think we're headed? And then kind of like maybe comment on what you see as the viability for exits and liquidity in general for funds.
Well, the experience at Mobius had kind of an interesting epilogue. And just to be clear, I was not the founder nor the CEO. I was brought on board to help grow the company. So I was earlier in my career, and was part of the sales and marketing organization that led to an IPO. And so I got that notch in my belt at a fairly young age. I later left the company and then came back.
Okay.
And I came back not to work at Mobius, but to be a CEO for the first time in my career, to create a new company. And this is right at the sort of apex of the internet boom and bust. So you kind of know where this story is going. That Mobius was going to be the primary investor in. So it was an opportunity for me to be my first startup CEO and have a strategic partner as a primary investor. And it was intended to be a financial play. So at the time, software companies that had gone public, that were growing at a very respectable pace, that were profitable, that had defensible market share, sort of all the key elements, you knew exactly what were the metrics that went into the most highly valued software companies. It was, it was sort of black and white, and this was the playbook. And if you could optimize on these variables, you were going to be in the top quartile or top decile or top 1% performing public companies. And so that was how everything was geared. And then there was the formation of the new business model, the internet companies, and a little bit like you were just mentioning, a company with 3 million revenues that went public. You didn't have to have a product necessarily, and you could raise a bunch of money and you could go public. And so the idea is that with Mobius as the primary shareholder, the new company, the company was called Click and Done, which by the way was very poorly named because the emphasis ended up being on the done part. But
Okay.
we were innovators in electronic bill presentment and payment. Market eventually became dominated by check free, but we were one of the first companies in EBPP, electronic bill presentment and payment. And the idea is that we were going to go public, and then do a reverse acquisition of Mobius, because
Okay.
the valuation of an internet startup was more than actually a proper, mature, and growing public software company. So the strategy was take Mobius public, but what's better than going public? Going public and then selling. So you get 2 bites at the apple.
Oh, wow.
And so that was the strategy. And all was going swimmingly until the bottom fell out, at which point then Mobius just bought back the portion that they didn't already own. But the experience for me was I got to learn what it was to start up a company, essentially with a big brother helping. And that was my transition to becoming a CEO and a startup founder, which is what I've been doing for essentially the second half of my career.
Wow. What year was that? It was like 2005?
99 to 2001.
Okay, 2001. Okay, yeah. 2001, 2002. Stock
Yeah.
market didn't do great, right? Yeah.
So,
Wow, what a
so,
ride. That's awesome.
so to your question about markets today, I mean, I think, a couple of obvious distinctions. One is the percentages of businesses owned by private equity. So that, there are many other good strategies to maximize shareholder value in addition to going public. And there's a lot of enormously large private companies who, create huge value in wealth for their investors, none the least of which would be somebody like SpaceX.
Oh, yeah. I was having cocktails with somebody last week, and their phone pinged, and it was Anthropic SPV,
Right.
that owns a part that has something that, and then Anthropic's private, but they're like, is this a good company? I'm like, well, it's a good company, but like, I don't know about the investment, because, devil's in the details, but like, why isn't a company like that that's clearly got market leadership, part of a duopoly or triopoly, or, like definitely one of the 400-pound gorillas in the ring? Why aren't they public? Why is that not, there was a time when it would have been fall all over yourself to get public as fast as possible so you can raise money to go faster. That doesn't seem to be the play. And there's certainly an appetite to invest in it, like what's going on? And then what's the future look like?
Well, I mean, the spigot for companies like that's only getting bigger, right? So why would you want to go public? I mean, you have so much more flexibility. It's not hard to get, to raise capital. I'm not sure what the advantage is at this stage when nobody really knows how this thing's going to play out.
Yeah. So stay private, stay away from the regulatory compliance burden of being a public company, right? And then just go faster while you can.
Right. And the reason they're structuring those SPVs as you described is because they can only have up to a certain number of shareholders before then they become regulated under Sarbanes-Oxley and in other accounting and financial reporting standards. So I think it just gives a whole lot more flexibility in a market that's moving very quickly, where fast pivots are important, and regulatory constraints can't make that go faster.
Neat. Well, Steve, it's been great having you. And it's all about travel and getting out there in the world and seeing stuff, making stuff happen. Any great travel stories you want to share with us?
Yeah, the dumbest trip I ever took.
Okay.
The dumbest and not dumbest. So I mentioned that I lived in Australia for 3 years when I started Open Kernel Labs, and we were raising a B round. The company was being very successful. I mentioned one of our early customers, Qualcomm, and we had just come up with a new use case that was going to did lower the BOM costs of a device by $15 to $20. This is when like taking a penny out of a phone was a big deal, and we were getting traction with many of the leading handset OEMs, LG, Samsung, others. So we were doing a B round, and I was living in Sydney, and we caught the interest of Benchmark. And so we were going through the process of raising capital and got all the way up to the partner meeting, through the gauntlet. So this is going to be like the last presentation we needed to do. And Peter Fenton, it was Peter Fenton, Bill Gurley, Mitch Lasky. I mean, these were like, the denizens of venture capital. And I was going to be presenting to them. And he said, it's almost, we're getting ready to go on summer break. And so we're not going to be in the office as much as we usually would. And we happen to be redoing the offices. So, we're going to be gone for a little longer than usual. So if you want to be here next week, we can make time for you. Otherwise, it's probably going to be about 3 months. And I had no other business in the U.S. at that time. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm literally going to fly from Sydney to San Fran, for an hour meeting.
Go have lunch. Yeah.
So I did the obvious thing. I got on the plane.
Yeah, sure.
I had the meeting. We had the presentation. We did not get the nod. So, it was sort of like essentially like 24 hours of air travel for an hour and a half meeting. We didn't get the money. But having said that, we did get introduced to Citrix, who became a strategic investor, which later was instrumental in the outcome for the eventual exit. So you never know where these trips are going to take you or where they're going to lead to. Oftentimes it's not something that's on a map or an itinerary, but it's some eventuality, some sort of what would seem like serendipitous outcome that you're so happy about, and it all resulted from a shitty travel experience.
That's awesome. Well, Steve, how can people follow up with you after this on the internet if they want to get in touch with you?
Best way to reach me is steve@matfresher.com, MatFresher, matfresher.com. Check us out and you can find me there.
All right. Well, Steve, it's been great having you.
Thank you, Todd. It's been my pleasure. I've been looking forward to this.
Thank you.
Take care.
For now.
Thanks for joining us in the Sky Lounge. Please like and subscribe to hear more from Tales from the Sky Lounge here and anywhere else you get your podcasts.